Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to episode number 27 of the Steel City Insider podcast, along with me, Jeremy Ritz, one of your hosts, and the Jim Wexel. And today we have Shane Hallam with us today, the draft expert for the Steel City Insider. Jim and Shane, how you both doing today?
Good, Jeremy.
Yeah, I'm doing good. We're almost at the draft, so I'm excited. This is my time. I love it.
There we go. It's April 14th. We were only 14 days away from round one and that selection at number 20. And we're going to talk all things draft today with Shane. But before we do so, we want to take a moment and offer our condolences and deepest sympathies to the Haskins family. What a tragedy that occurred over the weekend. Jim and Shane, your thoughts?
You have any thoughts, Shane?
I mean, I'm an Ohio State alumni, so I followed Dwayne Haskins as a player in college. And, I think on the field, off the field, what he did for the Ohio State program was huge, too. I think that's been a rallying cry. They wouldn't be where they're at now without his success there. I think obviously the NFL, the Washington situation was tough for him, but I think he was making his way in Pittsburgh, and it's definitely a tragedy. I was taken by surprise when it happened, and I definitely will always be a Buckeye quarterback that I'll remember forever.
I don't have any similar thoughts. I don't know him. I don't know him at all. I never met him. That's one of the problems we had with not getting in the locker room. I usually write a column about somebody when something happens like that, but I never met him. I know a couple guys tweeted that he was nice on a Zoom call once. And I remember Kabola got blasted by somebody for saying, hey, way to inject yourself into this, way to make this about yourself. I do think it's up to the writers that cover him to write something, and there's been nothing except one national writer wrote about an emotional interview she had with him and how he tried to hug her after. That was the only time they met, and she formed her opinion off that. And it just wasn't enough. We needed to meet this guy, and it's, I don't want to make this about myself, but I believe the locker rooms have to be open. I can understand why the NFL wants total control over media and wants to make it like college. I couldn't cover college football. I couldn't. But the NFL is for men, and I would have liked to have gotten to know the young guy. My father was killed on the side of the road when he was 22 or 23. I don't even know. I was an infant, and he was walking his dog in the morning. And so it's similar. And, I feel bad that Haskins I don't believe he had a child. And so people would think that would make it worse. But, I was never affected that I knew of by the death of my father. People bring it up and tell me they're sorry, and I knew nothing about it. And my mother led me to safety, and I've grown into a man who sputters and bladders on your podcast. But I do think the point I'm trying to make is they need to open the locker room so we get to know people.
But switching gears, we're going to jump into NFL draft talk. Shane is the expert, and Shane, you have a wealth of knowledge. We're going to jump in here looking at round one, pick 20, and kind of work from there. But where do you see the Steelers draft strategy? How will they approach this draft? A lot of talk about the homework they're doing at the quarterback position. You hear another camp saying that it's going to be defensive lineman. What's the overall strategy you see here with the Steelers in terms of the NFL draft?
Like I think the Steelers often go in with a similar strategy into the draft, where there are certain positions that they want to build and fill and find players that fit the team and fit the scheme, and really focus in on them and who's available when they pick. They usually pick that player. Every once in a while we've seen them move up when they've really liked a guy like a Devin Bush or a Troy Polamalu. So I think this is going to be a draft where I think the QB work that they've done is obviously the direction that they're heading if things fall the way that they should or probably expect them to. So I would fully expect them to take a quarterback at 20, depending on what teams above them do. I don't foresee a trade up in a situation. If there's one quarterback you really like, picking a 20, you're gonna have to move way up to make sure you get them. And I just don't see that being too viable at this point. And I think there's enough, there's enough QBs in this draft. We know all the guys that they're looking at. They brought in the top 6 for visits. If they like 3-4 of them enough, one of them is going to be there at 20. So I think that's probably the piece, unless some real value falls to them on the defensive line. Or maybe Trevor Penning, the Northern Iowa offensive tackle, or Derek Stingley, the LSU corner, right? If there's some value that you can't pass up, then maybe you pull that trigger and you look at a Carson Strong from Nevada in round 2, round 3. So I think there is still a little more flexibility perhaps, but I would still say the most likely situation is we see a quarterback, new franchise quarterback going to the Pittsburgh Steelers at 20.
So speaking of quarterback, and if you look at the top 5 with your Willis, Pickett, Corral, Ritter, and Howell, how would you rank those guys? And who do you see available at 20 that you feel from your analysis and perspective that they should take?
I think for me personally, often differs from what will happen in the draft, right? And what teams will do. Like I really like Matt Corral from Mississippi. I think he is a lot further off maybe than some of the other guys. And that's why teams might not want to take him. Like he was in an RPO Lane Kiffin offense at Ole Miss, and really quick release, has some athletic ability. He's a little bit small, and so I think you worry about him holding up because he had the ankle injury in the bowl game. But I think he shows some of those high end traits that you need in the NFL now that really fit Matt Canada's offense too. So I think they'll like him, but I do think like Malik Willis from Liberty has that upside when you have the movement skills and the arm. There's a lot you can do with that if all things go well. Now he has to get a lot better at decision making and his accuracy, holding the ball too long behind the line. He played in a bad team, but it's not really an excuse when you're a high end quarterback. Like you should be able to make these plays happen. And there were a lot of games, Louisiana Monroe, where he didn't. And then I think Kenny Pickett is really safe. I think we know, especially here in Pittsburgh, what Kenny Pickett is and what he can do. I mean, his throws on the run are incredible. There's a lot of great things he did this season. I think he's going to be a good pro. So I think if Willis or Pickett are there at 20, I think they pull the trigger. It's looking more and more unlikely to just sit back and be able to get one of those players. And so I've actually started kind of leaning in onto Desmond Ridder of Cincinnati as the best fit and value at 20, where you have a player with a lot of experience, 2 undefeated regular seasons at Cincinnati. He's the most athletic quarterback that tested in this draft. So he's going to fit the offense. He's going to be able to do a lot of the rollouts, a lot of the different play action concepts that I think Matt Canada wants to do. And you sit him down and let him learn how to get his footwork improved so he can improve his accuracy. That's kind of the one thing is he has some balls that are just like, where are those going? And a lot of it, I think it's a technique issue. Just, he gets under pressure a little bit. He freaks out a little bit. The footwork goes down. He can't throw the ball. I think those are things that are fixable. Whoever it is, I think a Mitch Trubisky signing makes it a pretty good pick because you do not have to play this player. You do not have to play them year one. There's no quarterback in this class probably that should play week 1, game 1. And I think that is what is going to be to the benefit of the Steelers versus maybe some other teams that might, like Carolina, that might pick a quarterback.
So to boil you down, Chad, there's enough mediocre quarterbacks in this draft that one should be available at 20.
Exactly, right? I mean, look, I think you and I are on the same page, Jim. Like, I don't know if any of these quarterbacks are going to be great, you know, but some have the traits maybe to get there if all these things line up perfectly. And that makes it tricky and makes it scary, I think, to take one.
Well, what about, first of all, one of the better known draftniks yesterday did a mock, and he had the Steelers trading next year's 1 and this year's 3 to move up to 12 to draft Ritter. I just, oh my God. I'm okay. I've grown. I mean, Jeremy, I know, is a big Ritter guy. And I've grown to tell myself that it's okay if they take him at 20. Because I do like the fact that he did win at Cincinnati, played all those games, is mobile, and seems nice. And being nice is huge for me. So he's a nice guy. And but there's no way I'm trading all that to move up for him. Now, let me, both you guys can answer this. Can they just play with Trubisky and in this era of $230 million guaranteed for one quarterback and $19 million guaranteed for a backup that you're not going to keep? Can you keep a guy like Trubisky and with a backup like Mason and draft better players all around him and try to win without the franchise quarterback, without someone that's taking up 30% of your salary cap? Why can't you try that? Because frankly, our guesses are as good as the NFL's. I don't see anybody making great quarterback decisions over the past 50 years of the draft. Can you get by without drafting a quarterback here? Because it just seems like they're just doing it just out of a perfunctory move.
Like, I personally, if it was me, I mean, I wouldn't draft any of these quarterbacks at 20. I wouldn't do it. I would rather, as you said, roll with Mitch Trubisky and see where you land next year, where there are going to be at least 2 franchise quarterbacks out there. And then if you want to give up the farm and go get one, I mean, give up the farm and go get one if you have to. But, you know, I think that's the fear is, you know, what if you're not in a position in the next 10 years to draft a guy that you feel like is good? If you like one of these quarterbacks and think they could be a franchise quarterback, like, you can't pass on them either. And if I don't think any of these players are going to be Hall of Famers. I don't think any of them are going to, you know, be Ben Roethlisberger or be on that level of Phillip Rivers or whatever. But, you know, if they feel that way, then I understand having to make that move when you might not get that opportunity again. You don't know when that will kind of present itself. But yeah, if it was me, I'm with you. I would build a great team. I actually like Mitch Trubisky a lot more than the general public seems to, and think he can be on the what we saw the Raiders give Derek Carr, you know, how much money. I don't think Mitch Trubisky's that much worse. Like, I don't think he's that much worse than Derek Carr. Derek Carr, you know, late in games is probably better, but like, I think Trubisky could be that with some time and with a good team. Like, why not do that? And if it blows up and you're terrible and you have a top 5 pick, you know, we have the consistency in the coaching staff and the ownership, like, you're going to make it up and you can get an actual quarterback that you like. I don't know. I would rather do that myself.
Yeah, I mean, I could see them winning with Trubisky, no doubt. I think there's a strong enough team around him. But drafting a quarterback to me is such an inexact science, and nobody really does particularly well at it. And that's where I think the importance of the organization comes into play, the support staff, the coaching, just the general quality of the organization. And if you look at these teams that are consistently drafting guys in the first round, your Cleveland Browns, which I'm sorry, they're terrible franchise. And they're typically bad teams to begin with. Pittsburgh's a different situation. They haven't drafted a quarterback in the first round since Roethlisberger. I think there's something to be said for the organization, the support that comes along with a franchise like the Steelers. So, you know, could one of these guys develop? We don't know. We can sit and forecast as much as we like, but I think there's something to be said about the organization that drafts a player. So
I just was able to look up all the quarterbacks drafted by the Steelers. Now, I love Kevin Colbert, and he gave me a great interview for my next book. He told me about how his gravestone will say, "I passed. Here lies the man who passed on Tom Brady for T. Martin." And he told me, he worked for Detroit, so he was very close to the Brady situation, and scouted Brady. Came back from a Michigan game because if you recall, Brady had re-won his job from Drew Henson late in his senior year. It was like the Michigan coaches didn't really believe in Brady, and they wanted to give it to Drew Henson, highly recruited Drew Henson, and Brady won it back. And so Colbert comes back, and his linebacker coach with the Lions, he asked Gary Moeller, who recruited Brady out of California to Michigan. He asked him, what'd you think of Moeller asked Colbert, what'd you think of him? And Colbert said, average this, average that. And Colbert said, I gave him a bunch of average statements. And Colbert said, what did you think? And Moeller said, what you're saying is true, but I'm telling you, all this guy does is win. And Colbert said, I've thought about that ever since. Because, of course, Colbert got hired by the Steelers before the next draft, and he had all that Michigan knowledge that he didn't use, and he drafted T. Martin. But these are the quarterbacks Colbert has drafted. Mason Rudolph. I'm not as down on him as everybody in the world is. Josh Dobbs, Landry Jones, Dennis Dixon, Omar Jacobs, Ben Roethlisberger, Brian St. Pierre, and T. Martin. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and he hit on one. And this is Kevin Colbert. I mean, he's retiring with honors.
But he does have 100% hit rate in the first round. So
yes,
he does. he does. And he was fortunate to get that one. And I will say that Kevin, and I know this for a fact, Kevin liked Ben, loved Ben, even before the Shane Andrews talk got started by Russ Grimm, who was the new assistant head coach and who had Cowher's ear for a few days. And it was leaked to the Tribune Review. And that's where the Shane Andrews story got some traction within the organization. Dan Rooney, Kevin says that Dan didn't get that from anyone inside other than they did like Sean Andrews. And there was talk about him, but he was worried more about the newspaper article that had come out that they were going to draft Sean Andrews. And so that's where that all got started, that Dan Rooney changed minds. Kevin said that they had already discussed and had their minds changed. But Dan still gave his speech about passing on franchise quarterbacks, which kind of brings us around to Pickett. The Steelers passed on Marino, and that was Dan's main thrust of that argument was I passed on Dan Marino, and my father cursed all of us until his dying day for passing on Marino. We had checked out the claims of drug use, didn't find narcotics, just a kid that liked to get around, had a lot of friends, was a local kid. And they drafted a defensive lineman, as they did with Chuck Noll's first pick. Chuck Knowles took Joe Green, and that's what he said in '83. Defense is what we started with. Let's go back to defense. So here we are looking at Pickett, maybe. Say you're looking at Pickett and Devon Wyatt, if I'm even saying that first name right. Do you go Pickett? Do you change the Steeler way and take the Pitt quarterback over the defensive tackle this time?
Yeah, I think Devontae Wyatt's really, really good. I'm going to have him rated higher on my board than Kenny Pickett. Like, I think in terms of pure value, like I think Devontae Wyatt's better, but I think the value of quarterback is that good. I think you have to take that shot on Pickett. If he's sitting there at 20, you have a player that has the traits, has the mobility. I mean, I think that's one thing with Pickett that's getting lost too, is like, he's a pretty mobile quarterback and his workouts are really good. I think you buck the trend, take the Pitt quarterback, and if it doesn't work out, then you draft another quarterback in 3 years, and like, that sucks. But that's going to have to be the way to find a future franchise quarterback, and ultimately, where you're going to have to sit.
But if you're a gambler, you stick to your theory, because in theory, you're going to have the odds going your way. So Gabe Rivera didn't work out over Dan Marino. Now you're going to switch your theory. You just know Pickett's not going to work out then. So I thought Pickett most of the year was a late second round pick. Then he really did impress me. And then I started begrudgingly, as with Desmond Ritter, say, yeah, if he's at 20, I guess you take him. But I, half of me wants to see Pittsburgh blow up if they pass on Kenny Pickett. The other half wants me to watch Wyatt develop as a defensive stud on that line. This is not a deep defensive line draft, is it, Shane?
No, I think it's one of the positions where maybe the first 2 rounds are pretty good, but once you get past those 2 rounds, it's going to be a lot of backups, rotational players.
And I think probably the status of Stephon too will play into largely whether or not they're going to draft a defensive lineman early on. But speaking of the second and third rounds, we've hit on the quarterback position a little bit. Let's say they do go quarterback at pick 20, whether that's Pickett or Ritter. Where do they go in rounds 2 and 3, Shane?
I think there's a couple different directions. We talked defensive line. I think if you're going to go with the defensive lineman, you want to look in round 2. As I kind of just said, once you get past that, it gets a little bit tenuous to find a guy that can step in and start right away. I think there's a couple players that could be available depending on the type of player that you want. I think if you're looking at that 5 technique, Perrion Winfrey from Oklahoma is really good, pass rusher, great first step. I love the penetration that he gets. Had a really big Senior Bowl week, good workouts. Like, he's kind of checked all the boxes. Oklahoma, they're awful at how they use their defensive players. I mean, they do not play to their strengths. And so there's a lot of Oklahoma players in this draft. Like, these guys are good, and they just did not use them well. He's one, along with Fidarian Mathis from Alabama, who doesn't quite have the pass rush upside, but is a little bit better setting the edge against the run. And so I think both those players could step into a 5-tech starting position. I'm a really big fan of Travis Jones from UConn. Might be a late first, early second round pick, but there's a chance he falls down. He's more of a nose tackle type with penetration ability. So I think that's a possibility. And then I think the secondary, right? I mean, corner, safety, we'll see what they do if there's an addressing of safety in the next couple of weeks or after the draft in free agency, once the compensatory formula's out the window and it makes a little more sense to sign somebody. But this is a deep safety class. I think in round 3, I've been kind of banging the table a little bit for Quentin Lake, son of former Steeler Carnell Lake from UCLA, who I think would perfectly fit that strong safety role next to Minkah Fitzpatrick. Really good in the box safety with some good coverage ability, tough. He's physical. He's not going to down. Pretty good tackling technique. I think he's a little bit underrated. So I like him. But I think there are players with some athletic upside. Kirby Joseph from Illinois, Nick Cross from Maryland in that second to third round range. Then, I'll mention receiver. I think they're going to take a receiver fairly early in this draft, between the second and fourth round. It's tough to peg the type because the Steelers, I don't think, have a single type of receiver. I mean, we've seen from Chase Claypool and Juju Smith-Schuster to Deontay Johnson. It's kind of a little all over the map. So I think Danny Gray from SMU is a player I've been mocking them a lot that I think has some similarities to Deontay Johnson, depending on how they feel about that specific role, who has some special teams ability, really good off the line, quick first step. I think he could be a good fit. If they want a big kind of upside player, Alec Pierce from Cincinnati, especially if you take Desmond Ritter in the first round. We've seen some teams lately be pairing up these college teammates. Pierce is one of those maddening players to watch, who's like super big, athletic. I mean, you can see him beat Alabama corners and then he just drops a pass. He just has some of these focus issues, but it's a lot to like with him. So I think there's going to be some areas to go that you can get a more best player available at these kind of group of positions at corner, safety, receiver, defensive line, offensive line, and make it happen in the second day.
I want to kind of redirect this question to Jim here, because we were talking about strong safety. Obviously, the Steelers haven't filled that need there. There's a vacancy for a starting spot. We've heard Tyrann Mathieu being rumored to the team. There was confirmation that Tomlin and the Honey Badger did speak over the phone, but then there's still Terrell Edmonds hanging out there. Jim, do you see them signing a strong safety before the draft, or do you think that they're going to go in getting their starter from this year's draft?
And maybe they did sign their safety when they signed Carl Joseph. It makes you wonder, what do they think they have? Do they want to use Norwood there? Norwood is a free safety in theory. And to tell you the truth, Minka could be a strong safety. He could be that playmaker that they want, that Carnell Lake, Troy Polamalu. It's kind of what they wanted to start last season. They thought Norwood would step right in. I can't say I'm a fan. I was a fan of Carl Joseph, but nobody else seems to be a fan of Carl's. So they have two guys. It makes you wonder if they're looking at someone in the draft, like maybe someone's son's roommate that they know about that ran a 4.3 at the combine, Nick Cross from Maryland, Tomlin's roommate. Does Tomlin say, we can get that guy in the third round, just stop worrying? It's almost like last year with Kendrick Green, that they could wait on the center because they had this guy in their back pocket. And I remember our people loved, I think Shane, I know we have three draft experts. I know at least two of them loved Kendrick Green. Shane, you're probably one of them.
Yep.
And I'm not down on Kendrick yet either, but it seemed like that they knew that they could get him in the third round and they could pass on a important position. So it almost has the same feel this year, that either they know they can sign Edmonds or that they like Norwood or they like Joseph more than we realize. Because they're just totally ignoring the opening there. And maybe they'll tell you, hey, it's not open. We like Norwood. So I don't know. Shane, is Nick Cross, who roomie with Dino Tomlin at Maryland, is he that guy in the hip pocket for the third round?
I think he could be. Like, I think that would make a lot of sense for them just to, like you said, do what they did with Kendrick Green. I mean, Cross is, I think he's one of those players, like when I look at it now, I'm like, I could go higher than that. But I felt that way with Green too, right? You kind of like a guy, you think he's going to go higher, but NFL teams aren't. But I mean, yeah, the 4.3, 440, and like his broad jump was, almost 11 feet, was one of the best for a safety ever. Like
almost as good as Jordan Davis's, the 340-pound nose tackle.
Well, look, we can't all be Jordan Davis at 341, just jumping there. But 10 feet 10 inches, not 95 percentile ever at safety. Like it's he's just such an athletic player. I think he's raw, and I think that's why you get those guys in the third round. That's the problem. I think is Nick Cross ready to step in and play every snap? I don't think so. But that's kind of the question.
Well, talk to me just quickly about Kyle Hamilton. Runs a 4.59. I don't want anybody at 4.59 in the first round. So is that why nobody's talking about him anymore? Because I didn't watch him play.
Like that is why I think people are worried, right? Why, he's not a top 5 pick, a top 10 pick. I mean, you watch him play, he's 220 pounds. He's one of the biggest safeties ever. So the 4.59 by itself, in a phone booth doesn't look great. But when you put that weight to it, he's pretty good. And when you watch him, I mean, he has that range. He has that range to go after the football. They let him kind of do, like you said, that Troy Polamalu rule of like run around and just make plays. And that's what he was able to do, making interceptions, making big hits with the size and speed that he brought to the table. Like he is explosive. I think he gets up to top speed a lot faster than most safeties I've ever seen. So I think the 4.59 is a little bit dismissive, but yeah, if you're picking 5th overall, like you can't take him anymore. You just can't do that and take that risk.
But you want speed on your field. I mean, Carnell Lake may have been in the 4.3s. I can't remember. I just put it in the book. He was at least 4.4, and he was a linebacker who eventually played cornerback at a Pro Bowl level. Troy Polamalu's one of his big days was he was man up with Terrell Owens in 2004 in the slot. Shut him down. Troy could have played corner if he had to, the way Carnell had to. 4.59, I don't know. Might as well bring Joe Hayden back. But okay, that's just my thing on Kyle Hamilton. People want to trade up for him to fill that spot. I don't trade up for a 4.6 guy. But anyway, I'm sorry, Jeremy.
No, all good. Good conversation. Shifting gears then to day 3, rounds 4, 5, 6, and 7 is when you really get into those sleeper picks, guys who maybe have big time traits but are inconsistent, don't have a lot of experience. Shane, any players from small schools or under the radar guys who the Steelers could be targeting that could maybe make an impact in year 1?
I think there's some small school corners on that third day that could be really intriguing. Joshua Williams from Fayetteville State and Zion McCollum from Sam Houston State. McCollum had top-notch workout, solid Senior Bowl week, like really physical at the line of scrimmage, but still has that kind of length and speed. That's really good. I think 4th, 5th round. And Joshua Williams, Fayetteville State, very small school. Obviously, he was dominant in his level of competition, but he's another player who has, some of those traits to be able to jam at the line, to be a pretty good tackler, like that you could develop. So I think if corner doesn't get addressed early, this could be a depth pick for that. I think there's some other small school players that I like a lot. Like one of my personal favorites is Pierre Strong, the running back out of South Dakota State. I think he's going to be an excellent NFL player and one of the better running backs from this class. Just really explosive, can catch the football. Should be a good, worst case, number 2 change of pace running back. And then 2 guys I think might be like 7th round undrafted types that I like the raw traits. Benton Whitley is he'd be an outside linebacker from Holy Cross, pass rusher edge guy who, just really has some nice lower body strength, can drive in the run game. I like how he sets the edge and shows a little bit of pass rushing prowess there. And then Jason Poe from Mercer is an offensive guard who I think would fit that Steeler mold where you're trying to get some more physical players. Like he's a really physical player, not the fastest, not the most athletic, but had some good workouts, maybe flashed some athletic upside. And I like those kind of players in the 7th. Like, okay, maybe he didn't play up to those numbers, but can we get him to play up to those numbers from Mercer College? I think Jason Poe is an interesting guy. So I think this is actually a pretty good small school kind of sleeper class because almost all of them went back to school with the extra COVID year. And some of them didn't even play last, in 2020. So we have a lot of those players that would have come out in 2021 up in this class.
Holy Cross. Are you old enough to remember Gordy Lockbaum?
I am not. So.
Oh, man. So I'm the oldest. Well, you don't remember, do you, Jeremy?
Yeah.
Gordy Lockbaum was a Heisman candidate because he did 100 different things for Holy Cross. And he was with the Steelers, I'm pretty sure. But the other guy out of Holy Cross is Ray Fittipaldo, who went on to a fine writing career with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He was an offensive lineman at Holy Cross. So anyway, that's my contribution on that. Those are my late rounders. Gordy Lockbaum and Ray Fittipaldo.
There you go. That's the duo. So Shane, questions about 2 guys that I did a little bit of homework on, later round guys. Dejane Dixon out of Nicholls State, big-bodied receiver, not a lot of speed, but combat catch hero. And then Devin Tompkins out of Utah State, super fast guy, can contribute in return game. You done any homework on those 2 gentlemen? And is there any possibility you see them landing with the Steelers in the later rounds?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always a possibility. I like Dejane Dixon. I think he is a really good possession type receiver who, I like those long arms and he uses them well. Like he gets off the line really well. You saw early in the season, some of those early games with him where they try to kind of jam him. Teams just stopped trying because he would beat them, with physicality. So I think he's an intriguing, reserve receiver. I think Tompkins is definitely that kind of special teams type. I mean, he is really small. That's the downside. But as a return guy, and we saw Raymond McLeod have a little bit of success last year at times, I don't think it's a bad shot to take in the 7th round undrafted free agency to grab a guy that is, 4.4 speed, really explosive, could be a return man and, maybe give you a little bit of on the field sometimes. So, but I like Dixon a lot. I think it's a deep receiver class. I think he has a shot to get drafted, but he'll be kind of on the line there.
Mm-hmm. And then kind of wrapping things up here, 2 more questions.
I just looked up Gordy Lockbaum. Ninth round pick, 1988. So come on, you guys have to be somewhat. Shane, you have to remember Gordy Lockbaum.
I was 2 years old, Jim.
Really? You got that gray in your beard like I do, so I thought you were 100 like me.
Yeah, 7. I was 7 years old.
I remember I knew all those late round guys as little back as 2 years ago. Before COVID came around, I started writing more books. But I remember I was working with Myron during the draft, and he kept asking me about a tight end out of East Arkansas State. And I'm like, Myron, I don't know that guy. I'm sorry. He goes, yeah, you do. Everybody knows him. And Myron was drinking that day. And he kept bringing it up. And I kept saying, I don't know him. And he later he goes, confound you, Wexel. This is during a break. I'm trying to make you look bad, but you won't look bad. I'm trying to make a guy up to see if you draft expert will say, yeah, I know him. He's okay. But so congratulations to you. And I apologize. I'm like, wow. Okay. Well, Myron announced his retirement the next week. And he said, Joe Gordon, the former, Joe Gordon did what Burt Loughton's doing now, the head of media personnel, media relations. Joe Gordon had called Myron up and said, you told me to call you when it's time to retire. That last performance, it's time, Myron. And Myron admitted all this, but I mean, he didn't admit he was drinking on the air, but I could see it. I was like the target of, I don't know, but I did Myron's last show with him. And it was so bad that he was asked to retire by Joe Gordon. So there's your Myron Cope story for the day.
Love it.
I love you still. I love Myron still. Myron helped me out a lot, to trust me. And he was a great writer, and he would critique my writing at times and give me tips. So that wasn't his finest day. It wasn't my finest day. And so, but when Shane was going through all those guys that I had never heard of, I thought I should do what Myron did. What about East Arkansas State?
Love that voice. That was that voice is definitely synonymous with Pittsburgh.
So is Gordy Lockbaum.
His book was what was it? WOI that was published. It was back in the early 2000s.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah, I remember reading that, and yeah, he was special. It's crazy. Is that my grandmother used to sound like Myron Cope. God rest her soul. She's no longer here. She sounded exactly like Myron Cope.
How was my imitation? Was it okay?
It's good. Give it like a 7.
Okay.
10.
That's pretty good. That's good.
All right, let's bring this home here. And we could let's take this in any direction that you want to take it. Final thoughts on this year's draft for the Steelers.
I think it's an important draft, as they all are. But I'm just interested to see what Kevin Colbert and company, what they decide to do in this last draft for him, passing the torch, whatever ends up happening with the new GM. Like, is it going to be focused on getting that quarterback and focused on kind of well into the future, or I think it should be a team that feels like they can compete this year. So I think the second day is going to be telling as to what direction the brass really feels about the Steelers. Like, is this a team that you can kind of patch back up, get the quarterback for the future, and where all systems go, compete this season? Or do they really see this as a bridge year? I think we're going to get to really learn that in the draft.
Jim?
Yeah. They could draft pretty much any position and I would have no problem. I really would. I mean, I'm down on the quarterbacks, but it's something you have to swallow hard and do every 18 years. So they've met them all, and I really won't quibble with somebody they've come up with, because they've put in the work. Even the guy from Nevada that they just had in as a visit,
Carson Strong.
He has a strong arm. He's the old classic pocket quarterback. And all the talk they did about wanting mobility kind of throws him out, but I kind of like him a little bit, as long as his knee's okay. And that's probably what they're going to take a look at too. But I don't see them drafting a running back. I don't see them drafting one in the 4th round, even though a lot of people want an upgrade from Benny Snell. I see them riding with Benny Snell and maybe even McFarland or Pierre Strong. He intrigues me from South Dakota State. I don't think we've had a South Dakota Stater in here, but it could go any even tight end for me. I know a lot of people like Gentry, and he's shown a lot more, but I wouldn't mind having 2 really, really good tight ends available. Otherwise, I have no qualms which position they go.
Well, it's definitely exciting times. And again, 14 days away from the first round, and we get to find out who the new Pittsburgh Steelers will be. And that's going to do it for episode number 27 of the Steel City Insider podcast. Shane, you want to take a moment to plug your work and give the listeners your Twitter handle?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. You can check me out over at draftcountdown.com. I'll have a 7-round mock draft coming out on Monday. So that's usually what people are interested in seeing and reading. But you can check that out. You can follow me on Twitter at Shank B. Hallam. And as always, over at the Steel City Insider, be finishing up the draft series with Jim there.
Awesome. And you know where to find Jim, and you can give Jim a follow on Twitter at Jim Wexel. There's no underscore in there, right, Jim? It's just Jim Wexel.
Yeah, Jim Wexel. Also, subscribe to this podcast. I know subscribing isn't as easy as it used to be, where there was a subscribe button. I think you have to look around for it, and it doesn't cost anything. Don't let the word fool you. You're not going to get charged. It just helps our algorithm show up better on your YouTube feeds. So subscribe to this. That's all I would recommend. And Shane, thank you so much. I tell you what, Shane, I love when your stuff comes in. I know I write to Roy. I say, Roy, you got to do this. You got to do this. Roy's a young writer, and I like to take young writers under my wing and probably give them too much free advice that they don't really want to hear in the morning. Man, Shane, I appreciate your work. It's just like, I can sleep in a little bit. It's Shane's. I don't have to put much work into it. So I appreciate your polish.
No, it's a high compliment. I appreciate you bringing me on, man. It's been a ton of fun working with you and working with Roy. So it's been great.
Yeah, and awesome. Roy's stuff's good too. He's just a young guy that I feel like, sometimes you feel it's your purpose to help young writers. I thought you were old. Now I find out you're only.
Oh yeah. Now you're gonna start giving me advice now.
Good stuff. Well, listeners, we appreciate your support. We will be back again soon with episode number 28 of the Steel City Insider podcast. Have a wonderful holiday weekend. Take care, everyone.